Welcome to the Tectonic Takes podcast. With me, Ivan, is Abram. Hopefully, we have our names sorted out. I know someone pointed to our attention that the names were flipped last time, but that's okay. Things happen. We got
I'm
great
just happy
editing.
they know our names.
Yeah, that probably helps that we introduce ourselves at the start of each podcast. But this was the last game before a much needed international break. Probably more needed than that is a morale reset for the San Jose Earthquakes. And we're going to look at this game against Austin. We lost 3-1. We're going to look at this Texas trip as a whole because we got some high highs and we got some low lows. And then we're going to preview our special episode 150 coming up next week. We're going to have another guest from Goal Sided, Cesar, joining us for that one. I was chosen to be part of the press coverage for Mexico versus Japan, so that's a great opportunity to cover two teams that are already qualified slash hosting the World Cup, and they're going to be playing in the Oakland Coliseum. So while we're really excited about that, we will talk about the San Jose Earthquakes still for that game as well, for that episode as well, covering the LAFC preview too. But for this, it's going to be all Quakes here, for better for worse. And the big issue here was the nature in which goals were conceded in this one, right, Abram?
Yeah, I mean, I have a lot to say. I have a whole notes app just written about every goal and like what specifically I found to be an issue. Because it wasn't a great showing from us. We should have done a lot better in that game.
That goes without saying. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of positives when you lose 3-1. I will try my best to find some of the positives. It may go in the territory of copium very quickly. The big one I'll just put out there is that if there was a game to lose between Austin and Houston, we lost the better of the two games to lose because Austin was already ahead of us. So if you're sitting in ninth place, it's more important that you beat the teams that are 10th and below you, especially if they're close to qualifying for the playoffs at your expense. And if you lose to a team that's ahead of you, especially on the road, you can take that in a vacuum. But this is a frustrating performance, and once again, losing games that we could have gotten more out of, leaving points on the board. Not Bill Belichick. Right now, TCU is playing in North Carolina, and Bill Belichick is coaching North Carolina. And we've made the comparisons between Bill Belichick and Bruce Arena at least a dozen times this season. But Bruce Arena did say that there was a half a dozen points at least that the Quakes could have had more. And if his assessment's correct, and we'd be on 41 points instead of 35 right now, we would be sixth in the playoff spots, below LAFC only on goal difference, which is conveniently going to be our next opponent in the second biggest game left of the season, because we're hoping that the biggest game will be decision day in a positive way, because I don't think that the Quakes are going to go on a rampage and win enough games where we're going to clinch before decision day. At that point, we're in survival mode for the rest of the season. But one of the biggest issues was the individual defending as much as the group defending, and you can pick apart some of the personnel decisions throughout. And one of the things was we thought that Reed Roberts starting this game for Bruno Wilson was an interesting choice. We're no longer having to deal with midweek fixtures, so rotation shouldn't be as much of an issue. Granted, Bruno Wilson did miss a lot of last season to injury, but he seems very healthy now. But then again, Reed Roberts, poor direct responsibility for the second goal, and then he subbed out in the 36th minute. So a lot to talk about with that. And then Bruno Wilson comes in, and he also scores an own goal, and it was not an own goal where you look at, okay, unlucky, you had to be there, tried to stop it. No, it's one of those own goals where you're thinking, what's he doing? And it was just really disappointing because had we done better in at least two of those three goals, theoretically we get a draw. But it's just, yeah, really disappointing. There's no other way to describe it.
No, I mean, definitely disappointing. I think that um, it was a huge game. Like, of course, it is the one that you'd rather lose, but don't get it twisted. Every point is crucial at this stage of the season. And while you were describing the playoff situation we're in, real quick tangent, I just the playoff structure that we have in the MLS. I know that people would love us to have relegation and promotion relegation. I think there's a case to be made for that, but the playoff structure does make for a very fun watch when you're watching mid-table teams, because in the Premier League, right, it's the champions and then the relegation. Those are the two things that matter, top and bottom. I really enjoy the battle. I'm not enjoying how stressed it has made me, but I am enjoying the spectacle of the whole thing that we have in the MLS, and it's different than you would get in other leagues. Um, but Ivan, if you wouldn't mind, I'd like to talk about the first goal. But I want to ask you how you saw it, who you thought was like, I guess, at fault, without like going too hard on anyone, if you don't, without needing to. But I'm curious, like, what your interpretation was from what you understood.
So Austin was playing with a 4-3-3, but Bakari had his legacy game. So Osman Bakari is one of their biggest signings going into the 2025 season, and he only had one goal going into this game. All season, if I remember correctly. And I even told our friends that we are Austin TV that it really was his legacy game. That if he wasn't able to have at least a couple of these performances down the stretch and Austin were to go quietly into the night, be it miss the playoffs or be one and done in the playoffs, that questions would be asked, and Bakari could potentially be a one and done failed experiment, which MLS has had plenty of those, despite many of those being heralded signings at the time. But him having an incredible performance, particularly on the right side, combining with the fullback Mikael Dessler, as well as Mirto Uzuni, who we saw flashes of what he was capable of in the U.S. Open Cup. At the time, he was just recovering from injury, but this is more of his fully formed performance. So, looking at that, it showed that our left side in particular was struggling especially in that first goal. And you're looking at players like Jamar Ricketts, unfortunately, and he's very much a boomer bust player sometimes from a defensive standpoint. And then Reed Roberts, he's only 21 years old, so we got to put that in perspective as well. Regardless of what league they play in when it comes to soccer, a 21-year-old center back is going to make mistakes. So we do have to give him some grace there. But unfortunately, many of those were big mistakes and they compounded and led to multiple goals in this instance. And it was a really tough game for him in particular. It was a tough game for the entire defense.
Yeah, I can't disagree with anything you said. I would say that on the first goal, looking at it multiple times, I don't think Reed Roberts makes a mistake. I'll get to that. So, leading up to that goal, Ricketts takes it down the left. He that's what he's supposed to do, and we have to get that right. Ricketts isn't supposed to not take risks. He's on the field for risk taking. He's an attacking player, in the style. That's why Bruce puts him on the field. It's not like, oh, yeah. He's an attacking player, and that's why he's on the pitch, because he's very strong in that capacity. Also, Costa's out. So Ricketts is going to be on the pitch. I don't blame Ricketts for taking on the player. He did lose that duel with their fullback, and that does suck. But the part that was the issue for me is that when the ball gets played back down the line, Austin plays it back, like, trying to clear it. I think Roberts, like, gets a touch on it, gets it over to Harks. Harks plays the ball, simple pass over to Chicho, and Chicho immediately looks to turn with the defender on his shoulder. And look, I think that, like I said, for Ricketts, the attackers need to attack, and they are looking to take risks. But I think that Chicho is looking at a really low percentage action when he's trying to make that turn with a defender on his back, especially when you look across the pitch. Jones is open with a lot of space in front of him. That's a safe pass. You can go back to a center back. You're isolated in the middle of the field, right? You don't want to lose the ball there. He loses the ball in a very tough position. Owen Wolf had a great game against us. He was very tough to play, and he plays a really good ball in behind to Bakari. And so everyone's looking at Reed Roberts because he's the closest to Bakari in this situation, right? He is just simply not as fast as him. And I know that, like, that's really tough to look at it and be like, okay, well, he should have done better. I don't think he physically is capable of doing better. I don't think he can run as fast as him. If he could, he would have. I fully believe that. And so it's really tough to look at that and be like, oh, that's a limitation of your ability, or like you should have done more. I don't think there was more for him to do. I think his full effort is in that. He does everything you would want. He tracks back really hard. He makes a last ditch slide, but obviously he's never gonna catch Bukari in that instance, right? And we had players like that kid Cowell, like really fast players who are like, what are you gonna do? So in that situation, I think Chicho is more at fault than Reed Roberts because it's just a too risky of a maneuver to make in transition, and it puts Austin in a really good spot to make that counterattack. And it's I just don't really see Reed Roberts at fault for that goal. I know that he's defending it, but he's just not going to pace. He's not going to keep up with Bukhari for pace. I'm sorry. What do you have anything to say about that, Evan?
I guess the best way to compare it, if you didn't watch the game, would be the Michael Bradley turnover that led to Portugal's equalizing goal when they played USA in the 2014 World Cup. There was a lot of sequences between that turnover and then, of course, the goal scored by William Carvalho that cost USA, which would have been one of their best victories in World Cup history, even in the group stage. And a lot of fingers are pointing at Michael Bradley because he lost it even at a high point, and that was the sequence of events that unfolded. So maybe Chicho is that first domino there. I think that's what you're arguing for. And this just harkens back to what the commentary team was talking about. I watched the game not in person, but obviously it was in Austin. But yeah, just from watching Apple TV Plus, the Bruce Arena message that was relayed from them was that we need Chicho to be Chicho, we need Martinez to be Martinez, which is the most polite way of saying that we need you to play better, which I think it's one of the most obvious statements out there that Quakes fans would agree with. And this is where the frustration comes in, particularly with Chicho Arango, because when things aren't going his way, we know that he wears his heart on his sleeves. He picked up a yellow card in this match, and he can be an emotional leader and galvanize the team, or he can kind of be the heartbeat, and you look at him, you look at his body language, and other people start to sulk and get frustrated too around him on the pitch. So that was tough. And I know that a lot of it, especially when it comes to the conceding goals, and we already established who a lot of the key contributors were to those goals. When it's a own goal, there's a clear contributor. When it's Reed Roberts failing to clear it, there's that too. But there's a lot of other sequences of events that you can point to, and of course there's the missed opportunities, the biggest one being Joseph Martinez within the first few minutes. The last one I'll add is I think the player that I underestimated most from Austin FC's attack, particularly without Brandon Vasquez and who has filled that void throughout the season, has been Owen Wolff. Two completely different players, Vasquez being a striker, very traditional one at that, whereas Owen Wolff, sorry, not his brother Tyler Wolff. Owen Wolff is a winger, and he provided an assist, player of the match performance for this game. And the way that he's been productive for Austin this season, and that was something that I wasn't aware of, that the commentary team reminded me about with his productivity this season. It's surprising that he hasn't had even a U23 call-up. I don't know how frequently all levels of the U.S. men's national team youth teams meet every window, but his most recent call-up at any age level was 2 years ago. And this is a player that at 16 years old, he was the youngest ever homegrown player in Austin history. And part of it, maybe people thought that he was getting an opportunity because his father, Josh Wolff, was the coach up until 2024. But he is showing that he's making his own legacy and his own mark in this Austin team. I'm not going to be nominating him to be on the U.S. men's national team senior roster for the World Cup or anything, but he's only 20 years old, so that's very impressive for him as well.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I think that he had a very good performance against us. In midfield, I speaking of midfield, I want to move on and talk about Chicho Arango. You mentioned that Chicho needs to do Chicho things, and Joseph needs to do Joseph things. I fully agree with the sentiment by Bruce, but I think that, well, first of all, I want to talk about the Martinez thing. He needs to get back on side. Then he scores that goal. We're winning the game. Brian Gingrich has, you know, Brian. He's always talking in the press box, but that's one thing where I'm like, that's the thing that you're the most right about all the time, where Joseph is just offside too much. He just because he's walking back to get onside. He needs to get onside. Just be onside, and then we can use you, and then you're much more effective for us. But Chicho, I want to say is that maybe it's the way we play. Maybe it's just his form, but I don't. I haven't liked him in midfield because of the way that he plays on the ball. I think that he is too aggressive when dribbling, too aggressive when trying to make chances. And normally those are good things, right? You want your attackers to be aggressive, but he lacks the subtlety to shield the ball correctly. He in moments where it's like a 50-50, it's like a he only has a 30-70. It's because he's making risks. He's a risk taker. He is too dangerous, too much of a maverick almost to be in the position he is at center attacking mid. I think that when he's a forward or a striker, right? You want those risks. That's where you take them. You are the least danger of anything bad happening, and I think that that's why he is an effective striker. But I don't think that he necessarily has enough ability to be a consistent center attacking mid. Whereas like Nico he's a lot safer with how he progresses the ball, the passes he makes, and maybe a little bit too safe. But I think Chicho is too far in the other direction, too volatile, too aggressive, and I think that leads to too many turnovers when we should be looking to progress the ball consistently and then make those risks in the final third rather than the middle third, which is what happened on the first goal, and that, in my mind, is the biggest thing that led to us being 1-0 down.
Yeah, so many key moments of the game where the Quakes essentially handed control to Austin, which is awful to do in any scenario, but of course, on the road, you're handing even more advantages to a team that's going to have the most advantages. Playing in front of their home crowd, playing in an environment, a stadium they're familiar with, in weather that they have more experience playing in. Granted, these are players coming from all over the world. They have all sorts of experience playing in all sorts of climates, so that factor is probably not as big of an issue. And with the way that this team is forming as well, there's a lot of questions in terms of midfield battles as well because the big acquisition, the only acquisition this summer was Ronaldo Vieira. So it's a 2 game sample size, and so far in the Houston game, we saw Vieira come on at halftime, and Bo LaRue was an unused sub. In this game, we saw Vieira start, and then LaRue came on with about 20 or so minutes, which, if that's going to be the plan going forward, and I'm not saying that Harks deserves to be dropped. He's been playing well too, which is why we were very curious about this acquisition in the first place. It seems a little harsh with the season Bolaru's been having. He's been, other than Christian Espinoza being as great as ever, the story of the season for the San Jose Earthquakes. And I can't point to too much he's done wrong to not be starting and to justify bringing in a player specifically to replace him. Maybe it's a tactical fit that Bruce Arena is looking at and it's not personal. I hope that, maybe I'm thinking further down the road and this situation is completely not going to happen, but I hope LaRue isn't the next Shakiris, which is wild to think about that being the thing to say 5 months ago. So it's really interesting. I'm very curious to see where we go from here with the LAFC game and beyond, because that might be a little bit of a subplot that maybe could be something or nothing. Who knows? We're supposed to speculate on these sorts of things on a podcast.
Sorry, my button wasn't working. No, I fully agree. There has been a lot of speculation about LaRue. I think that it's when you have a 3-5-2 with the center attacking mid, you want to have more protection for him. You want them to have more freedom to go forward, so you have more defensive, midfielders. And I think in Bruce's mind, Harks is a better defender than Bo, and Ronaldo's a very distinguished defender. Um, and then I would say that maybe in Bruce's mind also K is a defensive midfielder, and then so he would see Bolaroo as more of an attacking player, and I do think that he is more creative. Probably in the players that I mentioned, he is the most creative out of those, but he isn't limited to that. He has better defensive numbers than those guys. So it is a little bit perplexing, and I don't think I could like come up with a real rationale without it would just be 100% speculation. But I don't think that it's like a definitive marker for what we're gonna expect for the rest of the season. I know that like we want a more cohesive or more concrete lineup to look at and like be able to predict more consistently, but I don't think we've had one for very long this season for more than a stretch of maybe 3 games at a time. There's been a lot of rotation, a lot of changes, and Noel Buck is another guy who's there. Benji Kanovich could be filling in on the wings at any point because he's fit now. It's very fluid in Bruce's mind, I guess. I would love to ask him, but I don't think he'd like me to ask him, so I'm not going to. But no, I agree, Ivan. I think that we were missing a little bit of Bolaroo in that match.
Yes, I think that match could have benefited from him being on the field longer, especially when you're chasing the game. Because aside from the wonder goals that Ian Harkes provides, he can help stabilize the game when it's within a 1 goal margin either way. But when you're chasing 2-0 down, LaRue can help be that extra attacking force from a deeper position there. I will say, though, that as much as we as fans yearn for a consistent plan with the starting lineup and for things to be clearer than it may seem with a lot of these lineup decisions, I think soccer, among the sports that I follow closely, has the least starting lineup stability. And it's not just because of the injury factor, but because there's always players coming and going, whether it be international break, transfers, they fall in and out of favor. Someone fills in for a suspended player and they played very well, so now you don't want to take that player in. So that may be something we want as fans, but it's easier said than done. It's a very dynamic sport. For the center back grouping, though, that we have here, I think the one player that, despite how much this defense has struggled in this game and this season, and that's one of the big talking points whenever anyone covers a Sounds Earthquakes game or talks about them. Daniel Mooney has been the exception. Daniel Mooney has been phenomenal in terms of he provided the goal here. Not the best defensive performance for anyone, but at the very least from his individual play, you think that he has mastered many of the skills that we would have hoped, and for him to make the leaps that he has in a short amount of time, I do want that to be acknowledged, even as much as we want to dismiss the defensive capabilities of this unit as a whole.
Yeah, I mean, we went into depth on Muni last episode, and that's just a testament to even in a defense where things are very shaky, he feels very stable. And Rodriguez is a player that like last season, even though we had a terrible defensive season, it's like Rodriguez is our best defender by far. But Muni has made it to where we're not even missing him. And if you really think about it, before Bruno came back and we were lining up with Romney on the left, Rodriguez on the right, and Muni down the center, we weren't missing Bruno either. We were like, okay, Muni's got this. His passing is great. His aerial ability is great. Reading's great. There's not much to complain about. And obviously, he's not young. I think 25, 26 maybe, but he is like closer to being a rookie than a lot of the guys here. But I don't think that you would know that if you didn't have the context. I think you would look at him and see a well seasoned professional MLS center back.
Yeah, you spoke the words that I was hoping to talk about very well there. I think that comes from we're in episode 149 now. A good chunk of those episodes have been you, me, in some combination with other people involved there. So we have a lot of things in common in the way that we analyze these players. I do want to wish the best of luck for an outgoing San Jose Earthquakes defender as well. My tectonic take, maybe not so tectonic, but this may be premature, but based on his age, recently turned 30, Paul Marie has played his last game for the San Jose Earthquake. He's only out on loan to the Tampa Bay Rowdies, and he played well in a win against Pittsburgh Riverhounds in his USL Championship debut for the Tampa Bay Rowdies. But he wasn't able to find a home under Bruce Arena this season. He played a few times for the town, and at 30 years old, he maybe has one more move left in him to maybe another MLS team. Maybe, I know he's French, but he's played in the United States for so long. I'm not sure if there's a move to maybe a second division French team or a relegation battling Ligue 1 team. But I feel like maybe even USL, a permanent move to Tampa Bay Rowdies or somewhere else. How do you feel about this potentially being the end of Paul Marie's long tenure with the San Jose Earthquakes, Abram?
It's pretty disappointing because I've always felt that he was better than anyone wanted to give him credit for. Um, Obviously, he has glaring weaknesses as a defender. Can't defend the back post. He's a small guy, but in my eyes, depending on the team play style, he can very much be one of those players that will change a game for you with his attacking prowess, and also, he wasn't a slouch defensively, just on the ground defending. I never felt like there was a glaring issue. He was just not great in the air. His back post heading terrible. There was a point where they would spam that. The other teams would just do that over and over and over because they knew he couldn't do anything about it. But with that being said, I felt that he gave us a lot of the identity that we had at times where very few others were doing that. I think that he was a very good pairing for Christian Espinosa with being able to overlap on the right and then, protect Christian when he was, marauding forward. And then also on the left, just very versatile and also able to play forward as a winger, as well as being a fullback. I'm disappointed because I felt like he had more to offer us. I've defended Vitor Costa on the show a few times, and I stand by what I've said, but I think that Murray would have had a lot of value in this team. That I feel like Bruce likes to kind of make a decision and stick with it, and so very early on it felt like he wrote off Paul Murray and never let him get back into it. Like Nick Lima he's played in the game, but like he's also been one of those guys who's like kind of not shunned, but he's been out of it. Right? We barely see him, so it just tends to happen under Bruce. And yeah, Murray never got a very strong team around him, so I felt like he was his weaknesses were exacerbated by the lack of investment in this team, and I don't think that he was, necessarily. I felt like he was a bright spot throughout these last few years, which we've kept a lot of players who weren't bright spots, in my opinion. So that's what I have to say on Pomeroy.
there's just so much more to be said in terms of how he's positively affected the community of the San Jose Earthquakes. He's got live fans for his commitment and loyalty to the club, his opportunities whenever they were sparse, whenever they were plentiful. Meant a lot for him to be a San Jose Earthquake, and I wish there could have been a better send off for him than being dumped out on loan. At least being able to finish out the rest of the season, maybe a few more appearances here and there if possible. Um, so, thinking back to his beginnings with us in the San Jose Earthquakes, his last connection to French football was in 2013. That's when he left the academy at Cannes. So you may know Cannes, I believe is how you say it, as the French Film Festival. But it's also a club that is currently in Ligue 2, and that's where they were when Paul Marie left, and they got promotion the season after. And then he went to college 1 year in Division Two, and then for the FIU Panthers when the Quakes drafted him in 2018. The only other player left on the Quakes roster, and they had left in the middle of that, is Nick Lima from that 2018 season. Christian Espinoza wouldn't come until the year after that. So that just shows how long it's been that Paul Murray's been a part of this club for pretty much his entire prime of his career. He's been with us. And for San Jose Earthquakes, for the poor seasons that we've had, and I get Palmer was never a star player. It's not like other MLS teams were hunting down our doors to sign him, but he was valuable to us, and that's the most important thing sometimes. And Paul Marie is definitely one of those cult heroes that if you ever have a chance to talk to him, you'll see just why that he's a beloved player for us and for many fans.
Yeah, and I think, well, at least I hope that, moving on from Palmery, which is what it seems like is happening, is, a bittersweet thing because, one, I hope that he kills it wherever he goes. Um, Two, it is emblematic of probably a growth from the earthquakes to, and we brought in a lot of players. We brought in like strong players. So I hope that it's a indication that the trend will continue, and that we'll keep striving to grow and get better. And eventually we'll see it as a good thing that maybe we outgrew Palmery, though it wasn't fun to do.
I agree with you there that there's a caliber of player that if you aspire to be a better club than where the San Jose Earthquakes are at, that you want to shoot for some of those higher talented or higher ceiling players than Paul Murray. That being said, I talked to my friend Morgan, who's not just a fan of the Tampa Bay Rowdies, but she's also a photographer for many soccer teams in the state of Florida, as well as in other parts of the country. And she was excited to hear that Paul Marie was part of the Tampa Bay Rowdies. I got to give her a little bit of a scouting report there, and with them only 3 points out of the final playoff spot, which is a rare position that the Tampa Bay Rays have never been in the USL Championship as long as I've been following that league. They're usually in the top end of the table. That if he can galvanize them to make the playoffs, I think that'll be a nice, fun little story. But now we have to turn our attention to our playoff situation here with the San Jose Earthquakes. Currently sitting at 35 points, and we're going to be looking over our shoulders for the remainder of the season. At least that's what we hope. Because if we slip up too many more times, then we're going to be looking in other teams' rearview mirrors. Because right now we're in that ninth and final spot, and Houston still have one game in hand, and Salt Lake City and Dallas still have 2 games in hand. So there's just a lot that are not in our control. The only thing you can control is gain as many points as possible in the games you have left. And I don't think all of our answers are going to be found in this international break because there's only a handful of games being played, which is an improvement for MLS's standards, but still you'd like that to be zero, even if the only other alternative would be midweek fixtures. But the teams that we care about that are involved in this international break period are that Texas trio, in particular Houston and Dallas being the teams behind us. I don't know how Real Salt Lake are gonna make up all those games, but they're gonna have some games in congested periods of the remainder of the schedule there. So while we're gonna be focusing on watching USA versus South Korea and especially Mexico versus Japan on Saturday, you may want to also keep tabs on Houston hosting LA Galaxy and St. Louis hosting FC Dallas because that could determine how much work the San Jose Earthquakes need to be done, how many more favors we need to ask for from the rest of the league.
Yeah, we said it last time, Evan. We have to keep on fighting till the cows come home, and that's not just that. I didn't just say that to be funny. It is the absolute truth, and man, it's tough to always be here as quicksand. I mean, I guess you could say maybe it was worse this time last season, where it was like we're pretty much eliminated from playoffs already. So I'm glad we're not there, but I would love to feel more confident than I do right now. But I do think we can do it. I do think that we have the team, but they just don't look like the guys who we know they can be. Like in that Austin game, they look like, I don't know. They all look like they saw a ghost, and it was really rough to watch. But yeah, I really hope we can turn it around, especially in the LAFC game. It's going to be really big, and I think that's the first time they'll be at home, in a while. So definitely I'm gonna be there, and we're gonna have to. I hope you guys are there as well and help us support them because they will definitely need it.
If we had to guess going into LAFC, that based on everything we've seen, particularly in the last few games, thinking about the month of August going through this international break and then returning to Levi's Stadium on Saturday, September 13th, Bruno still believes that his strongest outfield lineup would be Romney, Wilson, Mooney, Vieira and Harks in the middle, Jones and Costa, and then Espinoza, Arango, and Martinez, right?
The change I would make, because I prefer him, just in how I wish we would play, is Harks would be out for Larue. But you could also say that Larue might be in for Vieira because, from what I understand, Vieira is not 100% match fit because they're in the off season when we brought him in, right? So it's just difficult, like physically difficult, to play a full 90 minutes of soccer. So therefore, it could be possible that he's going to be a second half substitution. But that's a 50-50 chance, right? So I would slot in Harks for no, I would slot in Bo LaRue for either one of those in the center of midfield.
Yeah, the midfield is definitely going to be the biggest story lineup wise for the rest of the season. I hope the defense, as at least in the personnel, isn't the biggest story. Will we see Reed Roberts play again between now and the season? Probably. I just would like that scenario to be we're up by a goal, maybe even two goals, and then he comes on for a Romney or somebody in that scenario. This is not the end of the road for Reed Roberts. We're not going to be Reed Roberts haters. Of course not. He's 21 years old. It's kind of weird for us as older adults to hate on a 21-year-old. And yet we do see that quite a lot on soccer Twitter slash X or other forums. So we do have to pump the brakes sometimes when it comes to how we feel about certain athletes and how we talk about them. I think as a society, we can acknowledge, and we have to an extensive amount, I'd say, in this podcast, almost 40 minutes in, that this was a tough game for him. And it is unfortunate that he had to be subbed off 10 minutes before halftime. But we will probably see him again, and it's hard to envision that it will be a worse performance, but we do feel like he has opportunities to improve because there's been many games this season, at least a handful, where I thought to myself, okay, I did not expect him to start, I did not expect him to play, but he is improving as I watched him along the season.
Yeah, I mean, there are the few games where I'm speaking knowing that you guys are going to disagree with me and have things to say, and so I'm trying to like block that out. But there's been appearances from Reed Roberts where I felt that maybe his rookiness his greenness has been less apparent, and I felt like he has done a good job. I like how he distributes. I like how he looks on the ball more than Romney in that position. I think he's faster than Romney in like the first few steps. Not overall. I think Romney is very fast and is underrated in that, but I think Reed Roberts is a more cultured player and could grow into being a better player than Romney. I do acknowledge that the second goal was his fault. He got too caught up in the fact that he didn't control it and was fixated on controlling the ball, getting the ball back, and having the ball. When what you're supposed to do in that position, when you have to recognize that ball is beyond saving, and you get ready to defend the throw in. That's what you do in that position. But if you're I see people, hating him too much. He wasn't at fault for that first goal. That's my honest opinion. And that's not me being like, oh, I just love Reed Roberts so much. I like him as much as anyone else, but I'm looking at this as somebody who knows the game, who understands what happened and is looking at this objectively, in my opinion. And that wasn't his fault. And if you watch it and you watch it with a clear head, I believe that you would think that too. But yeah, we will probably see more from Reed Roberts. It won't be the last, and I hope for his sake that he can do much better, and I think he will grow from that.
And as always, this goes without saying, but whether they're a star player, a starting 11 player, bench option, youth player, anyone who is a part of the San Jose Earthquake squad, and there have been some players throughout the years of us covering them through TikTok takes, through being Quakes fans, through our whole lives that we've had our frustrations with. That's normal, that's human, but we care about each of them. That's part of being a fan of any club, is that whoever's on your roster, you're going to defend them, you're going to root for them to succeed. And if there are players on your team that you support that you don't root for them to succeed, then you're just making being a fan and the time that you spend into this hobby, this passion, more difficult for yourself.
And it's already difficult as it is.
It's not easy, and it wouldn't be fun if it was easy. There's got to be highs, there's got to be lows. You can't win every game, you can't always be successful, and I know that many Quakes fans are probably watching this or have seen similar sentiments and be thinking, okay, but we've rarely been successful. Rarely been successful in the recent history, sure, but who knows when that tide is going to turn. And the rest of this season story has yet to be written, and we've seen some fights. We've won some games, we've lost some games, and it's not going to be linear progress. We're not going to win all 5 of our remaining games. Like, we can put that out the window, but hopefully we'll do well enough to merit a playoff spot. That's all we can ask for. And with LAFC's loss last night at the time of recording to San Diego FC 2-1, we've established from our matchup with San Diego that San Diego are a better team than us. But the way in which they beat teams, especially LAFC, through the counter and through precision, through athleticism, and making smart passes in the final third, that's something that, yeah, maybe we're not as good of a team as San Diego right now, but we can use some of those skills and those tactics to our advantage. And we have history on our side, beating LAFC in Levi Stadium in the past. And it's going to be a good game for that. And we'll have more of a preview for you in our next episode, episode 150. But one last thing I want to throw out there is that I'm just bummed out that the start time was moved an hour later, because we know how difficult it is to get in and out to Levi Stadium for people that don't live in the surrounding areas or take public transportation. So that's going to be another thing to consider if you're getting to the game, but it's fun. It's only once a season. We'll make those adjustments.
And sorry, there are people who watch the show who have a much harder time being in a support group, and those people have a really difficult time in Levi. They hate it more than we ever could. We get a nice cushy press box that has air conditioning. It's not that bad. Like, obviously, but the parking is bad, but everyone's gonna have to deal with that. And yeah, just go early. Be nice to people. Let people merge in when they have to merge in. Okay, I want every Tecton Takes fan to be on their best behavior in the parking lot. In the stadium, go wild, but in the parking lot, let's not have any fender benders.
We are proponents of the zipper method, so one car from the left, one car from the right, take turns, but don't go as wild as the Inter Miami fans.
Also, one of y'all, probably not anyone watching this, of course, but one of y'all stole my freaking bag last time I was at Levi Stadium. They broke into my buddy Jamie's car. They broke into his truck, took everything in the main cabin and my bag that I had left because I wasn't able to bring a bag inside. So you can keep it, but just don't do it again.
Wow, Grand Theft Bolsa. Who would have thought? I guess one more tectonic take to close this episode because we are going to cover Mexico versus Japan given the opportunity that's come up for me. Is it a tectonic take to say that right now Japan might be a better team than Mexico, at least player for player talent wise, Abram?
No, that's not tectonic take. I think it's possible to say that they maybe have a higher floor. Um, and a lot of their players play abroad and are very cultured in European football. They don't have like a, maybe as high of a ceiling as they once did with Shinji Kagawa and Kazuki Honda, which are players that I just love watching. But no, Japan is a team that is always very fun and interesting to see how they're doing, and I think it's how they're doing is really emblematic of just the world in general. Just teams outside of Europe and who you'd expect to who you'd expect to be doing really well. I love seeing Japan do well. Ivan, would you say that we could call this the Goku Derby?
Yes, of course. Dragon Ball Z has a high number of fans per capita in Mexico, as many of you are aware. So I think that's a very valid name to give this matchup for sure. And I do think that it's going to be very fascinating to see USA take on South Korea, Mexico take on Japan, and then USA and Mexico switch their East Asian opponents there. So you're going to have some different tactics, some different styles, some different players that you don't often play against. Granted, the Mexicans and the Americans that do play in Europe will have played a lot of these players often, but when you're in these different conglomerations of lineups with your national team squads, there's going to be a lot of adjustments in a short amount of time. But the thing that I'm most looking forward to is the fact that both these teams, they already know that they're going to be in the World Cup in 2026. So they're not worried about the stress of qualification. And those qualifiers that are going to happen during that window are going to be great games. Like, we're going to be keeping an eye out for teams like Italy, for example, that have work to do already because they lost a qualifying match to Norway. But for these international friendlies, particularly with one or both of those teams have already been qualified and hosts automatically qualified, that you're going to be able to see these players play more free and play for their spots on the national team. So there's still stuff on the line, even if their national teams are confirmed. That there's always going to be players that get called up in September before a World Cup but aren't going to be there in June. And you just want to hope that you play your best games and hope that you're not one of those players.
Also, a, a player that I think that I'd like to talk about just very briefly is Mora, Gilberto Mora, because he's looking. I was like, okay, cool. We have another Diego Lainez, like 16, doing really well. I'm like, awesome. Like a pretty good 16-year-old is great to have. They might improve and be like a pretty good player, but he's looking like a world class wonder kid. And Real Madrid sniffing around for him. I hope he does not go to Real Madrid because they have so many
There's a
players in that
couple
position.
steps in between before he gets to Real Madrid. That's what
Right.
I'm thinking. Maybe someday, but like not directly from Tijuana.
Exactly, but it's very good to feel excited about a player like him again. I think last time I felt that. optimistic about a player with probably Giovanni Dos Santos, because I saw Linez and I'm like, okay, good, but like whatever. But Giovanni, I was like, oh, he's one of the best players in the world. Um, Mora is like probably not the best player in the world, but he will hopefully be you know a world class player, and that's a really big accomplishment for Mexico.
Yes, it is a massive accomplishment for sure for him to be breaking through already in a league like Liga MX that there's already a lot of barriers to get to being in the starting 11 when you're at a young age. So he's scored against our Chivas in that 3-3 draw that was very intense and stressful for us, but he's definitely worthy of all the opportunities he's gotten. He does remind me of Andres Guardado in the sense that they both broke through for the national team and their clubs at a similar age. And with Andres Guardado, he made his first World Cup in 2006 as a very young player, and we were able to get so many more World Cup appearances and contributions from him since then. So whenever you have a player that's 16 years old that is immensely talented, you would hope that he has a long career, a successful career, and with his age, that he could be theoretically making his fourth World Cup appearance for Mexico in 2038, which is weird to think about. And he'd still be younger than 30. That is hard to comprehend. But most excited about him, of course. There's so many exciting players I can't wait to see, and I'm just thankful that through the work that I've done covering Bay Area soccer, primarily San Jose Earthquakes, but also Oakland Roots, that I was able to get this opportunity to represent our podcast and represent Bay Area soccer writers in this game in Oakland Coliseum. And I love San Jose. My family's from Oakland. I was born in Oakland, so anytime that there's a game of this caliber that can take place in Oakland, I am very much excited for, and it means a lot for meaningful sporting events to still happen in Oakland. That will continue to happen as long as the Oakland Roots and Soul are playing there in the Coliseum. But of course, it's been talked to death about losing so many teams. One to San Francisco, so thankfully it's still local, but then the others leaving further than that. So, but in any case, this is going to be very exciting. We can't wait to talk about this in more depth with you, Abram, and with Cesar from Goal Sided. I think we've kept your attention for long enough, so thank you so much for listening. That's our main thing to plug, is that keep your eyes out for this episode. Of course, you've already listened to that, but episode 150 is going to be a fun little milestone, and we're going to celebrate it by talking about this international friendly that means a lot to us personally, and also previewing a big game between the San Jose Earthquakes and LAFC. So until then, thank you as always, and go Quakes.
Go Quakes.